Rhodes Radio, where we talk to everyday people changing their community.
Well, blessed Sunday to you, fam. This is C.J. Rhodes with another installment of the C.J. Rhodes Show. So glad to be with you. We have spent the last several weeks talking to various candidates who are running for the highest offices in the city of Jackson. And in this particular runoff election, we've spoken to the two candidates who are going to be vying for your vote on this coming Tuesday, May 21st. And let me just remind people that everyone is in the city of Jackson who's registered to vote can vote in the runoff. Even if you did not vote in the primary, you can vote in the runoff. And so very tight race. And so we look forward, some of us look forward to the election being over. But in order to really understand where we are today and how we got here, I'm very honored to have my dad, attorney Carroll Rhodes, who's a civil rights legend and icon, who, along with the late Senator Henry Kirksey, helped to make this possible. The conversation about having a first black mayor or a second black mayor or third black mayor, black legislative leadership or county leadership or even statewide leadership has a lot to do with the great work they did. And so we want to talk about how do we get here and then talk a little bit about where do we go from here. So Dad, very glad to have you on the show.
I'm glad to be here, CJ.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the past. We rightly celebrate the civil rights movement, people like Medgar Evers, who lost his life to help secure the right to vote for African Americans in Mississippi. But there was a kind of civil rights movement part two in the 80s and 90s with you and Henry Kirksey and many others who, after we got the right to vote, helped to make sure that we could use the right to vote. So talk a little bit about the fight in the 80s and 90s and how that helped to make the Jackson political scene what it is today.
Now there are two avenues which we traveled along. One was trying to get more black elected officials in the state, and the other was trying to change the form of government in Jackson. And we were involved in litigation from the late 70s, 80s, and 90s. And prior to my coming on the scene, there was a lawyer out of Washington, D.C. He worked with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, Frank R. Parker. Frank Parker was Kirksey's lawyer until I came along. The Lawyers Committee left Jackson in '81, and I was trained under Kirksey and Frank Parker. At the time I started doing this type of work, Frank had done most of the work in the state, and they were challenging at-large election systems. So let me give a little history as to why we had at-large systems. Mississippi's population has changed over the last couple of centuries. At one point in time, Mississippi was majority black, but in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, 40s, and 50s, it's what is called the Great Diaspora. A lot of black people left Mississippi. A lot of black people left Jackson, and they went north.
They moved to Detroit,
Chicago.
Chicago.
Detroit, Chicago, New York. Some went out west to L.A., but most of them moved north. But the whites who were in control of government in Mississippi were afraid to give black people the right to vote. Right at the end of the Civil War, the three Civil War amendments were passed. 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery. 14th Amendment, giving rights to black people to be treated equally, and rights to everyone to be given due process. And the 15th Amendment that was guaranteeing the right to vote. After that was done, blacks began to vote right after the end of the Civil War in the late 1860s. And in 1869, we had blacks elected to state legislative leaderships and blacks elected to every position. And they were primarily elected as Republicans because Lincoln, President Lincoln, was the one who did Civil War, was a Republican. Ulysses Grant, who followed Lincoln, was a Republican. And the Republicans at that time wanted to make sure that blacks had the right to vote. Blacks got the right to vote, and the Democrats did not want to have more blacks have the right to vote, so the Democrats were primarily in favor of maintaining slavery. And so blacks were elected in the 1860s and 1870s. We had a black Speaker of the House, black Secretary of State, and we had other black elected officials. The white Democrats did not like it, and they started what was called the first Mississippi Plan in 1975. That was the Reign of Terror. 1875. And the Reign of Terror went from 1875 to 1890. In 1890, the white Democrats instituted the second Mississippi Plan, which was the Mississippi Constitution. J.Z. George was a Mississippi senator, white Mississippi senator at the time, and he said we can't go around and say that we want to deny the black the right to vote and discriminate against them because the U.S. Supreme Court might strike it down. But what we can do is say the characteristics we think black people have, we put that in a law, said if you have these characteristics, you can't vote. And so that's how the 1890 Constitution came around. One of the things that grew out of the 1890 Constitution was allowing the people who were voting to decide what type of local government they wanted. By 1890, there were very few blacks still voting because during this first reign of terror, the Ku Klux Klan and the Democrats, they intimidated, killed blacks. There were lynchings to keep blacks from voting, and it had the effect of stopping blacks from voting. So they came into the second Mississippi Plan, which was to have at-large elections. In 1902, the legislature passed a law allowing cities to determine how they wanted to be elected. And the city of Jackson in 1912 had a referendum where primarily white people voted because blacks had been denied the right to vote at this time. And they decided to have at-large election of 3 commissioners. It was 3-commissioner form of government. That stayed in place until after Brown versus Board of Education, the Civil Rights Movement came through, and then which led to the Voting Rights Movement. When the Voting Rights Movement came through and the Voting Rights Act was passed, blacks were armed with a new tool to go to court to try to get blacks elected to public office. And that's where the statewide effort was led to get blacks elected to the legislature. And Kirksey, in 1976, 1977, filed suit against the city of Jackson to change the form of government. We did not have wards. We did not have city council. We had 3 commissioners. They were elected over the entire city, elected at large. They were all white. And it took a battle, and Frank Parker was the lawyer who led that battle until I came along, and Dennis Sweet came along to help out with the city of Jackson to continue that battle, to change how the city of Jackson was elected its mayor and city council members.
So what year was it when it finally moved from the commission form of government to the city council that we know?
It was in the 1980s.
Okay.
It took that long of a fight.
It's about a decade or more.
More than a decade.
More than a decade.
More than a decade. It took that long fighting in court. And Kirksey, initially, he wanted 9 commissioners. Not 9 commissioners, but 9 city council people elected from wards. And the reason he wanted the 9 was because the city was large, and you had other cities, though less than half the size of Jackson, had 5. And he wanted an odd number so that the people on the city council, it would never be a tie. It could always be decided matters of the city decided by the city council. And he pushed for 9. There was a referendum in Jackson to go to 7 wards, and the voters elected to go to 7 wards. And to give you a little additional history, when Kirksey initially filed the lawsuit, the 1970 census showed that Jackson was 40% black. So if you had a majority vote requirement to be elected to office, and people were elected at large over the whole city, blacks could never be elected because then as now, it was racial bloc voting. For the most part, white candidates and blacks, whenever there was an election where you have a black candidate and a white candidate running against each other. And so it was difficult for blacks to get elected. The city was 40% black. With time, we went to the ward system. where you had blacks being elected from wards, you had majority black wards growing. The city's population has been changing ever since we went from majority white to now the city is about 80% African American.
So let's move forward a little bit then. One thing that we do remember is that Henry Kirksey did run for mayor in '93.
Yes.
And lost, and then the next 4 years, Johnson ran in '93 and also ran in '97, won in '97, this becoming the first black mayor. But since then, the demographics have shifted, so now we're at 80% black. And so racially, it's a different kind of city, but I'm assuming some of the same battles. Where are we as a city today? As you look at all the stuff that y'all fought, what bringing that wisdom to the present, how do you imagine Jackson presently and how it should go forward?
Well, one of the things that Kirksey fought for was to have all voices at the table. Black people were being excluded. He wasn't trying to make it all black with no white voices at the table. He just wanted to have black voices to be at the table as well. Once we've gotten black voices at the table, that takes care of the political aspect of black people having a voice. There's also an economic aspect to governance.
Okay.
The lifeblood of any city is its tax base. And a city can get money from several ways. One is to raise taxes, and the other is to grow economically. Because as it grows economically, if you have more businesses that are doing business, then people are paying sales tax. If you have more people who are making money and able to own their own homes, they're paying property tax. And so we have the dynamics are different today than they were in 1976 or 77 when Kirksey first filed a suit to give blacks a voice. When Kirksey first filed a suit, most of the development that happened in the metro area was happening in Jackson. There was, and I remember when I first came to Millsaps in 1969, there was a Jackson Mall. That was the only mall in Jackson. Everybody from 50 to 100 miles around Jackson.
We grew up in Hazelhurst. Every weekend, folks would love to leave Hazelhurst and go to Jackson's Mall.
To go to the Jackson Mall.
And to the movie theater that was nearby.
And there were about 6 movie theaters in Jackson.
Okay.
That's money being spent. People from small towns, surrounding area, come to Jackson to spend money. Then later, there was Metro Center built. It was still in Jackson. And so people went to the Metro Center to shop. So Jackson still had that tax base. Now, in the 40s and the 50s, Jackson also had manufacturing plants located in Jackson, and in the 60s and early 70s.